Hi, this is Jonathan Rosenhead, Jerusalem psychotherapist. This week's Torah and Psychology post, Parshas Tavo, is going to discuss addiction. And if we look at this week's Parsha, we read about the Tochacha. And we read that when the Bnei Yisrael are not committed to the Torah, and they become disconnected from the relationship with the Kadosh Baruch Hu, then they enter into this situation of punishment and a life of suffering. And the Torah describes in the Pesukim the different punishments or the reality of this disconnect from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which will create this life of suffering. And there's a few Pesukim, there's a sequence of Pesukim, which I think gives us an insight into the state of suffering and the reality of addiction that a person can find themselves in. That when it discusses the Pesukim, it has this sequence of Pesukim that says that the Bnei Yisrael will find themselves in a situation where they are scattered among the nations, serving other gods, where they find themselves suffering, that there's this longing and there's their heart is in a state of distress, and there's this fear from day to day that the Pesukim describe, that in nighttime they will long for the day, and in daytime they will long for the night. And they will find themselves returning to Mitzrayim again. Even though Kadosh Baruch Hu said that they will never return to Mitzrayim, they will find themselves back in Mitzrayim again. And finally, the Pesukim also say that they will offer themselves to sell themselves to their enemies, but there will be no purchasers, there will be no buyers. These Pesukim describe this gradual descent from a state of loss, of dispersion, of confusion, into returning to their former enemies, and to returning again to Mitzrayim and trying to offer themselves into servitude and selling themselves. And we can look at this as being this reflects the gradual process of addiction, this insidious development of a process of entering into addiction, because a person doesn't go directly into addiction. It's often we see it as a result, as a consequence of a gradual process based on the struggles and difficulties that a person is experiencing. Like the Pesukim say, that they find themselves in a situation where they are scattered among the people. Life suddenly is confusing. It's difficult. They feel lost. They start to serve other gods, meaning they start to have a disconnect from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. They find themselves serving other gods. There is a change in attitude, in behaviors, a change in outlook because of this confusion. And they start to, there's a sense of distress and confusion in the heart, this longing of the eyes, that they are trying to find something, trying to find some meaning, but there's a sense of distress and loss and confusion, which brings them into using whatever it is, whether it's some sort of substance abuse, whether it's drinking, whether it's an addiction to something else, whether it can be movies, it can be food, whatever it is, it's trying to find a way to assuage this sense of confusion and loss and distress. But it actually exacerbates the situation. They enter further, deeper into the sense of addiction. And this is why they come to, as the Pesukim describe, a sense of fear from night and day, this sense of false dawns. From in daytime they promise themselves that the nighttime will be better, they'll stop. And at nighttime, when they fall again into the trappings of addiction, they tell themselves tomorrow will be better. In the daytime it will be better, I'll get out of this addiction, I will stop. But it's this repeated cycle, this constant cycle of fear and anxiety, this trappings of addiction that finds them in a situation where there is no escape. And they return because of these false dawns and false promises, and they say they're not going to go back again, but it happens. They go back into the addiction. They find themselves back in Mitzrayim. They find themselves back with their enemies, back in the trappings and the servitude of addiction, the servitude of Mitzrayim, as the Pesukim describe. Even to the point where they want to sell themselves. They feel that the only way forward is to actually accept the reality of this addiction, that they sell themselves to their enemies, sell themselves again to the addiction. But as the Pesukim describe, there is no buyer. And although the Pesukim seem to present this as in a sense, it's a level of desperation and loss, that even when they want to sell themselves, even when the Bnei Yisrael want to sell themselves to servitude there is no buyer. If we look at it from the sense of addiction, this can present actually a positive outlook, a positive message that at the end of the day, when the person is selling themselves into addiction, is trapped in addiction, there is nobody else to sell themselves to. It's them and them alone dealing with and trying to learn and cope and find a way out of this addiction. And it's dependent on the person themselves. And this is the message that often the 12 steps process of addiction therapy tries to inculcate into a person, that they need to find a way out. They need to know that it's their struggle and their own personal individual battle. And at the top, at the final level of these 12 steps, is giving or is acknowledging and recognizing and handing over to a higher power. In a religious context, certainly in a religious context of 12 steps, is understanding that it's giving over to the higher power of a connection with Hashem, a higher power which is a Kadosh Baruch Hu, and understanding that the way to get out of this addiction is to understand that you need to reconnect with this higher power, to hand over to higher power. And as the Torah presents, when there is this disconnect from a Kadosh Baruch Hu, then there is this sequence of psukim of returning to Mitzrayim and being stuck and selling ourselves. And if a person is able to go through this process, if they are stuck in this addiction, if they're able to connect with this higher power, to reconnect again with the Kadosh Baruch Hu, then there will be no buyer. Obviously, there is going to be no buyer to say you are stuck forever. You yourself, as the person, is able to reconnect with the Kadosh Baruch Hu, reconnect with this higher power, and to get out of Mitzrayim, to get out of this addiction. So hopefully from these psukim of the Torah, we can actually reinterpret it as a positive message of hope in getting out of addiction. I wish you a good Shabbos and keep well.